meeting is now being recorded.
Yeah, well, we have an excellent agenda with Barb Lawler, Dan Burks, and Keith Srivastava. And so we're looking forward to seeing everyone in Tucson. So if you have any questions, if you want a copy of the agenda or you need a registration link, please email us and we'll get it to you ASAP. So today we are pleased to co-present with Anish Srivastava on one of our latest research studies, Safety, Security, and Privacy in the Interconnected World of IT, OT, and IIoT. Anish is the CEO and President of TUV Rheinland OpenSky, and we are so pleased that he is taking some time to talk to our room council.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I'm going to do the normal procedure, which is kind of interview style. I'll be the research wonk, and I'll introduce Anish to the slides that are, I think, most salient. And Anish, feel free to provide color commentary wherever you see the opportunity. Okay, so we'll be really informal, and if you have comments or questions, even in the middle of the presentation, use the chat feature. I know some of you are pretty good at that, and that will make the process even more interesting. But let's go to our next slide. Betsy, good. So the purpose of our study today is to better understand the concerns that companies face, specifically around functional safety, cybersecurity, data privacy, where there's a convergence of IT, operational technologies, and industrial Internet of Things, IIoT. Convergence in this world implies the consolidation and integration of cybersecurity, safety, and privacy functions, and includes the integration of IT and OT. So we're really looking at how organizations are going about managing this convergence process, and what are the barriers and challenges that they face in implementing. Go to our next slide. So I'm going to do the research stuff first, a little bit about who participated in the study. Our sampling frame was pretty significant, nearly 17,000. Basically, we had a total of 597, just shy of 600 respondents, and we once again report a very good response rate of 3.5%, which is greater than the theoretical average or median or mean, which would be about 2 to 2.5% when you're dealing with experts, as we do in this study. So good news for us that we have a good quality study. And people found it pretty interesting because it's different than the normal research topics that we've done in the past. So I think there's some really interesting and robust findings as a result of a good quality sample. Go to our next slide. So the people who responded to the study range from senior executive, vice president, or senior vice president level, all the way down to consultant and contractor. We also have a fairly large number of directors, managers, and supervisors. And the way we look at seniority, if you basically have respondents who are at or above the supervisory level, that's considered a well-experienced group. So we do have engineers and technicians, rank and file folks as well. And really the idea in having this kind of a data point is the ability to bifurcate the sample to see whether there are differences between those who are very senior versus those that are more likely to be rank and file. Go to our next slide. So the distribution of respondents according to the panel, the chain of command, another way of describing this. We have the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, the CISO, the Chief Security Officer, compliance, and you can see the list. Privacy, risk officer, procurement, product engineering, data center management, executives, an executive committee, and even lawyers, general counsel. So we do cover quite a bit, and you have to, because we're not dealing with a homogeneous sample. We basically, by design, wanted to look at how role plays into this whole issue. Okay, next. Now, this is the distribution of respondents according to primary industry focus. Looking at OT issues or IIoT issues, we basically were focused on manufacturing and industrial companies. So we have industrial manufacturing, which is the largest chunk at 22%, followed by energy and utilities, consumer goods and retail, oil and gas, healthcare and pharmaceuticals, logistics and transportation, automotive, telecommunication, and others. Some have argued that healthcare is really not an OT environment, but it actually is with all these medical devices. So we included healthcare and pharmaceutical, of course, in our sampling plan. Next slide. Doing a great job, Betsy. Thank you. This is the respondents according to the organization's worldwide headcount. We have a very diverse group in terms of headcount or organization size, from less than 100 to more than 75,000. In some cases, we have some very, very large companies with nearly 1 million people. Okay, let's go to our next slide. The distribution of respondents according to where employees are located, in other words, are these multinational or domestic organizations, and the majority are in more than one country. Some are in all spheres or all global regions. But since it's a U.S.-based study where the company is headquartered, we expect the U.S. to be at 100%. It says 99%. It's probably rounding error, which happens from time to time. Okay. Now here is our first data slide that I think deserves Anish's opinion. But before we talk about it, let me tell you the structure of this question is strongly agree to strongly disagree. There are 5 choices called an objective scale, and the strongly agree and agree is what we're presenting here. So 62% either strongly agree and agree. And what are they agreeing to? If you look at the bottom on those, starting with from the left side, security maturity will increasingly depend upon convergence of IT and OT control systems. 62% believe that to be true. In contrast, at 47%, leaders recognize that the inability to achieve convergence reduces trust and confidence with supply chain partners. So again, that's not at that midpoint, which would be about 50%. 47% isn't horrible, but it's obviously you'd expect that to be much higher if you're going to have a success in the convergence process. We'll talk more about that later. But any surprises here, Anish, that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think a few things that I would like to add here is this is pretty much in line with what we are seeing, and there is a level of demystification that's happening. Mostly people thought that the OT environment existed in an air-gapped setup, and therefore they were much protected or secluded from the IT side of the vulnerabilities, only to realize that when they actually do a kind of an asset discovery, they realize that the new equipment, the new technologies, the devices that they brought into the OT environment does have all the tenets and capabilities of what a traditional IT system provides in terms of connectivity to the internet, IP-based, it's no more air-gapped. And therefore, that's a good level of revelation as well as demystification that it's no more air-gapped, which leans itself to the fact that there is that level of convergence and integration that is happening without a lot of realization, and it's just a matter of time that you're only going to be as protected and as strong as your weakest link. So we will see some of these things evolve in the subsequent slide, but I guess the numbers are just going to go up as we hear more and more of these breaches and they become more and more public. There would be a much higher level of concerns, because I think the last point I want to make here is it's the impact here is more to do with the safety than just the elements of data leakage or identity theft. I think the question here is the impact here could be life-taking, could be impacting things which are fail-safe and safety systems that can be compromised. And then it's very difficult to put a number or quantify that from a risk perspective. And that's the level of elevation, that's the level of conversation and awareness we are seeing in the industry.
Thank you very much, Anish. That's great. Susan, do you have a comment?
No, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Okay, great. So now we're going to look at achieving the effective management of the convergence process. Go to our next slide. So this actually, there are 2 thoughts here. We just, for convenience, kind of slapped it together, but there are really 2 issues. So first, let's look at the blue. The blue is IT and OT convergence is a good idea. There's perceptions about IT and OT convergence. The red is digitization is driving IT and OT convergence. So in terms of our sample, the overwhelming majority, 70%, see it as IT and OT convergence is good, it's important, it's relevant to them. Digitization is driving IT and OT convergence, that's at 65% yes response. So in both cases, we basically get very strong agreement that convergence is defined by us in our sample, and our survey instrument is viewed as very important, a good idea, and very helpful. Anish, does this surprise you in any way?
It does not, and I think it very well leans itself to what I just mentioned. Much more focus around safety instrumented systems, which is essentially the last line of defense with regards to automated defense mechanism that we see in the industrial facilities or in the OT environment. So I think this is absolutely in line with what we are seeing in the industry as well.
That's great. Thank you, Anish. So on our next slide, we're going to look at perceptions again, and we use our favorite scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and we look at just the agreement side. So let's look at some of the comments here in terms of attributions that were made by our respondents. Convergence is not possible without the support of the CIO. Remember, the CIO is the most common leader, if you will, in the chain of command in terms of ownership and responsibility for convergence of the IT and OT functions. 73%. Convergence is not possible without strict safeguards to protect the sharing and use of data that is critical to operations at 65%. Convergence is not possible without the support of C-level executives, 62%. Convergence is not possible in organizations with a long history of strong silos and turf issues. And we'll see this over and over again in our data. We'll talk about that again. And then independent certification of cybersecurity, functional safety, and data privacy initiatives is important to achieving convergence, 54%. So again, in every case, we're over the 50% threshold on the strongly agree response curve. And you can see that there's kind of an interesting pattern. But it's not just about technology limits or resource limits. It's also about silos and issues of the sharing of information. Anish, any comments here on this slide?
No, I think that's good. Good to hear, Larry. I'm fine.
Great. Now, Susan, do you want to read the Joe Weiss comment? I'd like to kind of get him involved.
So, Joe Weiss is saying that OT is control system networks, not the control systems and devices themselves, and he also thinks that privacy has nothing to do with safety. Timothy responded, Dr. Ponemon is correct and can affirm, according to the National Telecom and Information Administration, healthcare industry does include an IoT and, by extension, OT. So, Anish, do you have any comments regarding that?
So if I'm reading this right, the question here is, privacy does not have a very strong role to play in terms of safety. Is that the question? Is that?
I think so. I think it's certainly one element.
I think it's a comment more than a question. But
yeah, and Joe is great, so we appreciate his comments, and he's an expert, a true domain expert in it.
I think privacy would start playing an integral role in specific industries like healthcare, and I think that's what's also mentioned here.
Right.
Again, it would have elements of what is considered PII data in many cases and IP information, and with more and more OT systems moving to being connected, having its own IP address, how does that information get transmitted, stored? Has a bearing. It may not be as prominent across all industries, but it does have its importance in some aspects.
I concur. I agree with your assessment, but I think it's important that Joe brings an interesting perspective, because most of the research that we do is around IT, and very clearly the OT environment, or whatever we want to call it, it's not necessarily parallel to the IT function. It's basically its own ecosystem. And Joe, with his background in safety and nuclear engineering, I believe, creates some interesting dialogue around this topic. So thank you, Joe. Okay, let's go to our next slide. Okay. Most companies are highly effective in achieving the following tasks important to achieving convergence. There's a different scale, folks, from 1 to 10, where we look at the trending to very effectiveness by adding at the 7, 8, 9, and 10 response. Susan, you want to kind of go through the list?
Yeah, so they're most effective there, as they self-report, with safety program management, cybersecurity planning and business priorities, leadership, governance security program, management, awareness and training, incident management preparedness, testing and assessment, threat and risk assessment.
The highest percentage is the safety.
Yeah. And this is what they're effective in.
Right.
Most effective.
And again, the 69% is they're not at that, the 7. Right, they're 69%, they're not 70%, but they're close. Some of these numbers are very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
Anish, any comments?
No, I think I agree with this. And if I may, Joe, just give you an example, just spark right now on the OT side of it. This is something that we are seeing, things like your surveillance cameras. Now, it depends how you would qualify that, but they do have elements of privacy that gets weaved into it. We are seeing, as a part of our broader business of certification and testing, these days, a lot of these smoke detectors are coming with photosynthesis, which has the capability of identifying if there is a people or if there are people within the facility or within that premise and so on and so forth. Those capabilities are not enabled, but it's there on board, on the chip, on the motherboard, which then has aspects of how they can be enabled and how does it impact the privacy of people within that room. So just wanted to share some of the things that we are seeing specifically, and these are examples of industrial IoT and IoT as well. But on this slide specifically, I think nothing to add on this, Larry.
Oh, thank you. Go to our next slide. So this is fewer companies are effective in achieving the following task important to achieving convergence. Again, the 7-point scale, or 10-point scale, looking at the 7+ response. Third-party risk management, 42%. Compliance with regulations and standards, 37%. And privacy program management, interesting, 31%. Susan, do you want to explain how this works?
Well, this is part of the other question, and this is where we find where there are gaps in their ability to achieve convergence with their third parties, compliance, and privacy programs.
Right, so the fact that 31% for privacy is the lowest, does that have a meaning?
Anish, does it have a meaning to you?
I'm sorry, Susan, what was the question?
Yeah,
the privacy.
Only 31% say they're highly effective in their privacy program management, and so I think what the report says is that this has been not a big priority in the convergence.
Which is true, and this goes back to again what Joe mentioned, that it is not today on the list because not all IIoT or OT devices, I would say, process a lot of PII data. So, and that's what we see here as well, being lower compared to the others.
Excellent.
So I think that's also building up that that's true.
Well, thank you, Anish. Let's go to our next slide. Now, this is a little different. This is a rank ordering, and rank ordering can be very, very tricky because, as I said many times, you're ranking, so the bottom of the rank, the one that's in this case like important is ample budget, is it's not that it's unimportant, it's just relative to the other choices. It happens to be number 7 out of 7. So keep in mind that don't over-process when you see a result like that because budget is going to be important. But really what we're looking at, how important are these organizational characteristics in ensuring successful convergence? Resilience is number 1, agility, strong security posture, knowledgeable or expert staff, preparedness, leadership, and then budget is last on the list. Any surprises here to you, Anish?
I don't, Larry. I think I'll leave budget out for a moment, and leadership is a bit of a touchy topic. But resiliency, agility, strong security posture, and knowledgeable or expert staff is definitely what takes the first 5 spots in most cases.
I agree. I think also sometimes the leadership is a little bit of a scapegoat. People might actually they don't like their boss, basically. Okay. Sorry, next slide. Betsy, you're doing a good job driving the slide train. who are the individuals involved in directing efforts to ensure a secure convergence process, and they were given a list, and they got to choose the 4 top responses. But number 1 on the list, the CISO. Number 2, no one person has the responsibility. Out of our studies, who's the influencer, decision maker? In many cases, it's not one person; it's a shared responsibility. Or worse than that, it's no one at all. It's just not no one owns it, so it's not being done. Number 3, it's interestingly here, is the CEO, followed by the Chief Security Officer, followed by the CIO. Here, the CIO moves down a little bit in comparison to other slides. Then the Chief Operating Officer and the board, and finally, at the bottom of the list, the Chief Privacy Officer. So I think, again, it goes back to the point, privacy is definitely part of convergence, but it's maybe not as high a priority as security, which shows the CISO at top of the list. Anish, any comments or any surprises here?
No, I guess there are elements that we've seen, and it's also to do with the fact that there isn't a very clear integrated organization that's responsible for both OT and IT environments. And it's because that's how it's been traditionally, which is also what we see as a building theme, the silos. So in many cases, we've come across where CIO is not necessarily responsible for the OT side of the house, or even if they are responsible, it's at a very cursory, at a superficial level. So, and CISOs do at some level, driven by more from a compliance perspective, do play that role of being that glue, but it's like they don't necessarily have the teeth or the budget, other than meeting more of the checklist compliance-based requirements. Now, this may not be a very broad-based generic statement, but more towards what has been the trend in larger enterprises. Again, this varies by industry, but I'm just giving you a flavor that I think this is reflective of what's happening and what at least I have experienced. I wouldn't say it's across all industries. This may hold true, but it leads itself well into what we are seeing, and this will change. I'm very confident this will change, because particularly it's not the convergence. Convergence is not new. It's been going on. It's about the integration of the convergence and OT, and who are the integration champions and how they playing a leading role is the open question, and that's evolving.
Great insights. Thank you, Anish. Okay, next slide. How does your organization manage the convergence process? So we have a combination of both in-house and outsourced. Then we have just in-house team at 34% and outsourced services at 20%. And this probably varies, looking at the data, it does vary a little bit by organizational size. Smaller organizations are basically more likely to completely outsource. But it's still, even some larger organizations do outsourcing, so it's not a 0-1 exactly. Any surprise here, Anish?
No, Larry.
Okay, great. Next slide. Does your organization have a budget for achieving convergence? There's an interesting response here, because my expectation when we did the survey, the actual survey form, is that the yes response would be very low. But it's 45% is high, but it's possible that when you say budget can mean something really formal or really ad hoc, loosey-goose. And so it's possible that that's driving up that 45%. And then no is 50% and unsure is 5%.
Next slide.
Yeah.
I think on this slide, if I may just add 2 cents, I was a little surprised as well, because my take here would be that the no would be higher than 50%.
Yeah.
Particularly on the OT and the integration and bringing the two houses together. But this is what has come out from the respondents, so we have to respect this. But this was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I think ideally it would be good to, in the future, if we do a question like this again, is to basically define what we mean by things like budget, because to an accountant, budget is different than to someone in security and versus someone in risk management, whatever. And so people understand we're talking about, we're framing it the framing allows us to talk about the same thing in different functional areas. But again, the yes response and the no response were very surprising. Go to our next slide. Now, this is overcoming the challenges and barriers to a successful convergence process. There's a lot of good data points here to share. Go to our next slide. Okay. Susan, can you do the barriers?
Okay, so what are the barriers? Well, respondents could select 3 from the list below, and the biggest one is the turf and silo issues.
56%.
Yeah, and that showed up in the previous question too, as one as being difficult. The inability to achieve convergence because of these turf and silo issues. 47% say it's the inability to control security, safety, and privacy initiatives. And 42% say the inability to secure information assets and the IT infrastructure. Then we drop down to 40% with respect to they don't have the necessary experts in-house, the inability to enable the free flow of information. Budgets is also lower, and in this response too, 31% say it's a lack of resources, 23% the inability to collaborate with supply chain partners, and 18% say the lack of leadership.
Oh, that leadership thing again. Okay. Any comments?
Yeah. I think I wanted to share something which is also an external validation. I'm sure we've heard of the U.S. energy company that received a $10 million fine not too long back. It was in February of this year. And this fine was from the regulator, NERC, for nearly 130 violations of the critical infrastructure protection standards. And if we look at it in terms of the root cause, some of the findings, some of the things that was shared publicly, lack of management engagement, support and accountability relating to CIP compliance was one of the reasons. Organizational silos in the form of lack of communication between management levels within the companies were others. So pretty much if you look at the silos as a theme, along with the skill set, the lack of understanding of the management, is what we see coming out of the survey report is also what was the fallout or the findings of what led to this major gap in the fines that the U.S. energy company had to pay in Fed. So I just want to share that and then remind that this is something that we've seen not too long back. And I think if as an industry people don't rise up or take this seriously, we'll see much more of this.
Great insights. That is very, very interesting. Thank you. Go to our next slide. So what prevents companies from achieving a strong convergence process? Susie did such a good job, you get the hard one.
Yeah.
The long one.
So this is with respect to process. And at the top of the list, it's the lack of skilled or expert personnel, followed by, or a tie, is the insufficient assessments of the risks that exist, insufficient visibility of people and business processes, complexity of the compliance and regulatory requirements. 42% say lack of effective technology solutions. Budget, again, is low. 35% say it's insufficient resources or budget. 23% say lack of oversight or governance. And then leadership, again, is low, 12%.
The leadership thing keeps on coming up. Anish, any comments here?
Lack of leadership in terms of this is again to do with where does the true accountability lie. I think what we've seen is a very different set of decision makers when it comes to the OT environment or investments around it versus IT. And no common glue in terms of an integration leader or integration team that has the mission of overseeing both where there are organizational companies that have high dependency on both IT and OT investment and environments. So that probably leads itself to the lack of leadership support, more so because the OT side of it is such that it's not an easy decision to touch or make any changes on the OT systems, because the runtime or the downtime and the resiliency that you have to build or any planning that goes in some of those critical industrial systems, it's phenomenal compared to what we would see on the IT side. I mean, on the IT side, we can move to cloud, we can have some temporary fixes, investments that don't drain a lot of capital, but that's not what we've seen on the industrial side, and that's where we need to take a more pragmatic approach in terms of it's not a one size fit for all. So it has various different flavors, because OT environment is much more complex, and it's complex because it's evolved over the years and it hasn't been refreshed as frequently as some of the other technologies on the IT side of the house has.
Great insight. Thank you so much, Anish. Go to our next slide. This is the mother of all slides. This is a one-slide research paper. Susan, you're so good at this. Will you tackle this for us?
Okay, the keys to achieving a strong convergence process, the number one is the ability to control the proliferation of IoT and IIoT devices. And that's followed by the ability to avoid security exploits and data breaches. Again, the ability to overcome turf and silo issues, 59%. Limiting unauthorized access to data and applications, 57%. The continuous availability of the IT infrastructure, 56%. 52% is the ability to ensure smooth migration to the cloud. 45%, the ability to meet consumers' expectations about consent at every layer in the digital ecosystem. Another 45%, the ability to ensure the privacy of customer information. 43, it's compliance with regulations,
which, by the way, is pretty high.
Data privacy. The availability of a secure cloud environment, 40%. The ability to use sensitive and confidential data to improve customer experience, 34%. And the ability to balance security needs with customers' experience, 31%.
Nicely done. Thank you. Lots of interesting findings here, but I think privacy does show up again, even if it's not the highest percentage. It's still viewed as relatively important. I think that's worth noting. And then also the use of sensitive and confidential data. So I consider that primarily maybe about analytics, big data analytics specifically. That could definitely have a privacy element as well. Anish, any comments?
I'm good. Nothing to add on this further.
Great. And this is a ranking, and it's one of the longest ranking questions we ever had. Well, you don't like to rank more than 3 or 4 items. So we ranked 11, and I didn't think we would get a result, and we actually got a great result. But number one, in terms of the negative impact of disruptive technologies on the convergence process, mobile, followed by IIoT devices and robotics, interestingly enough, and cloud, industrial control systems generally, quantum computing that shows up even though it's not real as yet. People are thinking about it pretty seriously, especially if you're in encryption, blockchain, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, social media, and drones. Interesting. Any shocks here to the system, Anish? Are you surprised by any of this?
No, I'm not. In fact, anything below quantum computing all the way up to drones are not as prominent in terms of the negative impact or being disruptive. But however, I just want to share that interestingly though, we don't hear much about construction as an industry, but they use drones extensively. I mean, leaving outside of the defense and military, if you talk about on the commercial side, construction industry leverages drones extensively, and they've had some breaches and some challenges, but it's been more with regards to data theft, loss of intellectual property, and ransomware than necessarily anything else from a broader safety perspective. But mobile, of course, has been disruptive, cloud without a doubt. robotics and IoT pretty much go hand in hand. So I think the first four has always been a topic and something that's been discussed very frequently.
That's good insight. I know that drones has a significant privacy element as well, because you could basically be capturing a lot of personal information. Especially, you said in construction, I think of like real estate and people having a drone flying over their property. That could be a little bit scary, and which does happen.
I think, there's a question I see on the chat window from Bob. So cloud, you're absolutely right. It's both an enabler and a distractor. Distractor in the sense where it's a closed environment, air-gapped environment. How do you have the right level of zoning done to ensure that only a set of equipments or devices are able to communicate to the internet and is able to leverage whatever cloud has to offer, whilst all the other devices which still needs to be air-gapped is still maintained. So I think it's to do with a few things. One is in most OT environment and in even mature enterprises, it starts with first and foremost is they don't know. People don't know what assets exist because it's accumulated over the years. The network architecture is never refreshed. So it's a revolution when we go out and do a thing like a discovery or kind of an assessment, and then they figure out what new devices have been added. And three is that because it's still so legacy, before you move to cloud, there is a level of transition that you have to make in terms of upgrades, making sure that the peripheral components that communicate with each other is born in the cloud or cloud enabled in some form and shape. So it's both an enabler and a distractor.
Excellent point. And I think almost everything could be both, right? Like I'm thinking of artificial intelligence. It's very important now for cybersecurity tools, but it also could be a tool used by the bad guy. They also have access to artificial intelligence. So there's kind of a dark side to every one of these. I do agree the top four are the ones that we should focus on. Go to our next slide. Now there's a relationship between cybersecurity and business objectives. And here we have kind of three different things that are going on. We have the alignment of cybersecurity, safety, data privacy objectives with business objectives. So the first on the left side, moved from left to right, the alignment of cybersecurity objectives, the alignment of safety is the middle, and the alignment of privacy, which is the end. And we have fully aligned, partially aligned, not aligned. And you could clearly see that the fully aligned is 25% in the case of cybersecurity, 35% in the alignment of safety, and only 18% the alignment of data privacy objectives. And the green bar, which is the other side of the scale, we basically see that privacy is most likely not to be aligned, and fully aligned, and safety and cybersecurity are basically viewed as more important, or from an alignment point of view. That's how I'm reading it. Susan, do you have any comments you would like to add?
I think maybe Anish would want to comment on that.
So I'm just trying to view this from perspective, the alignment of safety objectives, 36 people. I just, this should not be the case, but this kind of looks fine from perspective that, again, we see privacy not playing as an important role, which is, again, what we see as a theme. Safety, yes, because if you look at our the respondents, they are from that industry where safety does play an important role. I think they have been breathing safety as a part of the core business. So it's pretty much embedded. Now it's a question of extending the understanding of security beyond fire exits into what it leans itself on critical systems, which are now controlled by sensors or by IT systems, and so on and so forth. So I think this makes a lot of sense as I see this.
I think you raise a good point. I think that even if the privacy objectives, the alignment of privacy objectives it's not aligned actually at 50%. There's still 50% where it's partially or fully. It's like the half empty, half full argument. I consider privacy getting rated here as still being something you want to pursue. It's you don't give up on it because it's lower than the other choices, the other categories.
Right.
Go to our next slide. How influential is cybersecurity, safety, and data privacy to your organization's business strategy? Now we're looking at business. And we're looking at the very influential and influential response combined on a 5-point scale, similar to the strongly agree and strongly disagree. And 71% cybersecurity, very influential. Safety at 62%. And then data privacy, once again, a little bit of a laggard here at 36%. But again, 36% is not necessarily zero. It is still important to many of our respondents. Anything here that you'd like to add, sir?
Yeah, just on the privacy side, if I may. So if we traditionally look at the bulk of the industrial control systems, they are not as client-facing or consumer-facing, which also means that it may not be processing a lot of PII data. Therefore, data privacy may not be as much a very strong theme for them. And I'm just trying to, what Joe mentioned, that it's all to do with how it's stacking up, because privacy becomes more and more of a concern when you're dealing with a lot of client data, consumer information, which is not mostly the case with the OT system. So I think the 71, 62, and 36 kind of explains itself.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. Susan, do you want to tackle this one?
So what best describes your organization's greatest concern during the convergence process? And one was of greatest concern to 3 least concern. And again, security is the greatest concern to organizations, and privacy is the least concern. Again.
And I'm not sure there's any surprise there. It's completely consistent with the 3 people who were responding.
The next slide.
Okay. The ability to maintain a strong cybersecurity, safety, and privacy posture. So let's see. We have as choices a strong safety posture is 62%, a strong cybersecurity posture is 44%, and a strong privacy posture is 39%. This is again at the 7. Anish?
I guess if you compare from the previous few slides, privacy is still holding its position where it was. I think the only flip we see here is between cybersecurity and safety, and I guess that's also to do with the industries that have safety on a much higher pedestal versus probably cybersecurity. So it shows, for example, if we had the respondents as banking and financial services, I think we would have, for them it may not be safety, it may be cybersecurity. So looking at the whole demographics of what's just presented, Larry, the respondents, this aligns well. That's how I see it.
That's great, and I agree with you. Go to our next slide. This is convergence of ITOT and IIoT. And what is II?
Industrial Internet.
You got it. You get to win the prize. Okay. Susan, strongly agree?
So this again is an objective scale from strongly agree, unsure, disagree, and strongly disagree. And so we're showing here only the agreement responses, and 60% agree that digitalization is driving IT and OT convergence. Leaders recognize that convergence decreases OT risk, and they also recognize that it decreases IT risk. Those are the highest levels of agreement, 60%. And 58% say the security and safety of IIoT devices is essential to their business mission. Independent certification of IT and OT controls is important to achieving convergence, 56%. And then we drop down to 45% of respondents who agree that independent certification of IIoT devices and applications is important to achieving convergence.
Awesome. That's great. Anish?
Yeah, I want to give some examples. So digitalization, and we see more and more of this in the coming years. A great example is if we talk about just elevators that we use in a daily life. The elevators that now get installed are so advanced. They have sensors. They have the ability to connect with the control and command center of the manufacturer for real-time monitoring, health checks, maintenance, updates, and so on and so forth. This is just the example of elevator. I mean, we've seen examples of printers, commercial printers having a similar capability. We are now seeing more and more of these being extended to large robotics equipment, large industrial control system equipment. So digitalization is not a choice. It's an art now, where everybody is looking at moving away from the air-gapped to real-time monitoring, real-time maintenance, real-time health check, to be in a state of what I would call as audit ready. I mean, this is not audit. This is more to do with being safe, being resilient, reducing the downtime. So digitalization definitely is. I think all the other ones, the first three, pretty much is linked to each other, because they are ultimately going to help reduce a lot of IT risk and OT risk, because we are seeing more and more conversations around real-time monitoring of the OT systems, which wasn't so. If I just go back and reflect 3 years or 4 years back, there wasn't as much discussions as it is today about real-time monitoring. Plus, some of the forward-looking organizations are also talking about how do we correlate the real-time monitoring of the different events that are triggered, not only from an OT side, but correlated with the IT side of it, so that we have a much better predictable model, and so on and so forth. So clearly the first three is where the industry is moving, and then there are some clear examples and leading indicators of that in the times of, in today's time.
Excellent. Thank you, Anish. Okay, there's a lot of stuff here, and we're kind of running out of time, but we can do this, I think, in summary form. Primary barriers to the adoption of new technologies that support automation through IIoT systems. Susan, you want to just take the top 5?
Yeah, it's visibility of threats and vulnerabilities, the inability to prioritize cybersecurity risks. Again, it's a lack of personnel with sufficient knowledge and expertise. Once again, the silo and turf issues, and then the cost of enabling security technologies. So those are the top.
They're all at 60% plus, so that's very important. At the bottom of the list is a lack of C-level buy-in. Again, that leadership issue keeps on showing up. Bottom two, yeah. Next slide. The importance of IT and OT controls, and now we're using a different objective scale from essential to irrelevant. And the importance of IT controls to supporting innovation, 66% say it's essential or very important. And then 62% say the importance of OT controls to support innovation. In terms of supporting innovation, the percentages are high in both cases, well above the 10% threshold. Any comments here, Anish?
We would see this because IT controls are much more matured and defined. So not too surprised in terms of IT controls supporting innovation, ranking higher than OT. But I think we would slowly see this. Again, this is going to be industry-specific, size of the industry and both the exposure and dependency they have on industrial control systems or the OT controls. But I think this is pretty reflective of the maturity as well.
I think that's a good point. And 66 and 62%, the difference is not that, they're not that far apart. In fact, if you look at the margin of error that we use for this survey, it's about 4.5%. So, it's in the margin of error that they're both equally, in essence, equivalent.
Yeah. My only surprise here would be that I was thinking the gap would be a little more, not just 4 points. Okay.
Sorry, I would feel, I thought that as well, that it would be a much larger gap, but it's an interesting result.
It is.
Okay, I think let's go to our next slide. Oh, yeah, let's do this. Susan?
These are yes responses about the strategy or plan that companies have in place to control the proliferation of IIoT devices. 56% say that the strategy or plan includes the protection of specific data assets in their organization. About half say that their strategy or plan includes third-party relationships such as supply chain partners, and only 35% say that their strategy includes maintaining customer and or consumer trust.
Very interesting. Anish, any comment here?
Yeah, just in the interest of a good theme that we are seeing evolve, particularly with not as much as industrial, but IoT, and is the theme around trust. So the trust building part with the proliferation of IoT devices, not as much as industrial, but IoT specifically, is something that is picking up. I think the rest of it seems reasonable. And we don't have much to add here.
Thank you, Anish. You always have something great to add. So, let's go to our next slide. So this is near the closing, or a couple of slides away, but recommendations to achieving safety, security, and privacy convergence. Susan, since you wrote the masterpiece, the research report.
So these recommendations come out of the findings, and at the top is addressing the conflicts created by turf and silo issues. The suggestion is the creation of a cross-functional team to manage cyber risk across IT and OT systems. Involvement and support from the CIO and C-suite is essential to ensuring that they have the resources, including the in-house expertise for the convergence process. A weak security posture is the biggest risk during the convergence process. As a result, organizations should establish strict safeguards to secure information as well as the IT infrastructure, and consider investing in technologies that improve visibility and business processes. And then we have a few more.
Next slide.
And other recommendations, that you should have a strategy, and which should include monitoring the risk of these devices in the workplace, assess and understand the vulnerabilities and risk and the functional safety, cybersecurity, and privacy programs. And then once the assessment is completed, consider independent certification of cybersecurity, functional safety, and data privacy initiatives. And then not stop there, but conduct regular reviews of third-party management policies and programs to ensure they address the landscape, the ever-changing and dynamic landscape of third-party risk.
Very cool. Okay. Next slide is
Caveats.
Caveats. You know these caveats by heart, folks. But if you want to read it with report, but we don't have to go into detail. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, this is important because you want to read the paper and you want to know how to get that copy of that, and also listen to the recording again of this webinar. So, any final comments, Anish, you'd like to share?
Yes, if I may, I just want to, on the closing, share that we've kind of seen this theme around the conflicts created by turf and silo issues creep up a few times, but all that I can share from my experience interaction has been that it's not a simple or easy problem to solve. And one of the biggest reasons is the language that people on the OT side, people on the plants, on the manufacturing, speak is very different from what people speak on the IT side. So it's a very different lingo, it's a very different language, it's a very different level of understanding of priorities. And I think that's been, it's not the intention, but that's been probably one of the biggest or the top two reasons why these silos have existed. And there are some very concerted effort that I've seen in mature organizations to bridge this by building SWAT teams or teams that have representation from both sides. But netting it out, it's not an easy problem that can be solved. And it is because of purely to do with what it involves in terms of the day-to-day business interactions, the skill set, the language, their understanding of business priorities on both sides of the houses. So that's something I just wanted to share from my end, Larry.
That's great. And, Anish, I want to congratulate you. You're a new fellow of the Ponemon Institute, and also Betsy Friedman, who's on the call today, is a new member of the new fellow of the Institute. So we really appreciate your service and your consideration, and it was a pleasure to work with you on this research. Hopefully we get to do it again.
We would. Likewise, Larry.
But we do have questions or comments, and maybe I'll go through it after the call and send people an email with a response. Anyway, thank you, folks, for being on today's call. We hope to see you in Tucson next month at the RIM Renaissance. If you have any questions or concerns, just give us a holler. And thank you, Joe Weiss, for your help here and in presenting your point of view. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Anish.